I know Gedalia is looking at me with beady eyes. Beady eyes. You're going to have to excuse me, Rabbi Isai, but I have a responsibility not just to the Olam that's here, but I have a responsibility to the hundreds of people that watch on TorahAnytime.com. So you're going to be in for a very quick chazara. Very quick. I'll do it very quickly, as you know I can do. I can't believe I did that. How is it possible? How is it possible I did that? Okay. 3 lines from the top of Chavdal Amud Aleph. Amar Abaye Afanan Nami Tanina. We learned likewise, like Rabbi Chanina, that when it's Raiv versus Karav, we go bas a Raiv. Because in the vaginal canal, if you find blood there, it could either come from the uterus, or it could come from a mysterious chamber right on top of the vaginal canal, if it's a cut. So if you go bas a karev, well, it's closer to that chamber, and then the blood would be tar, because the blood of a cut is tar. But if it came, the raiv, the majority of times, is that it comes from the uterus, and then it's tameh. So we learned dam shenimtza b'praister, blood that's found in the vaginal canal. Sveikai, if we don't know its nature, tameh. We assume it comes from the uterus. Shecheskasei min hamakar. Now this is va'afal gav de'ika aliyah, even though there's a small chamber above the vaginal canal, the mikrova, that's closer. So if we would go bas a karev, we would say it comes from the small chamber on top of the vaginal canal. Amalei Rava says, no, you can't bring a raya to Reb Chanina, because Raiva Matzi Kamrit, you're talking about, if it's a question of both a majority, because the majority of blood comes from the uterus, and also the frequency. It's frequency. A woman doesn't get a lot of cuts, so the frequency is it comes. There, when it's majority and frequency, Raiva Matzi Kamrit, Raiva Matzi, Lekalaman Dharma. Nobody says that we would go with proximity against Raiva Matzi. The Tani Reb Chia, Dama Nimtza B'Praisa, blood that's found in the vaginal canal, Chayav and Alav Albiyas Mikdash. If the woman entered into the area of the Mikdash, she would have to bring a carbon. Remember, if she did that b'mezid, it's an Issacharish, so she would bring a chatas. And if she touched truma, we would definitely burn the truma. V'sarfen alav es truma. V'amar Rava, and Rava says, Shmami na mid Reb Chia tlas. We could deduce from Reb Chia 3 things. Shmami na roi v'karev, that if it's majority pitted against proximity, halach achar arayv, go bas in majority. And therefore we say it comes from the uterus and not from the chamber, which is closer. V'shmami na ruba daraisa, that raiv is biblical, and therefore she would bring a carbon, which is only if it's daraisa. V'shmami na isel Reb Zera, that one raiv is enough. You don't need 2 raivs, because if you found meat in a town, and there are 9 kosher butcher shops, and also the majority of the travelers that come into the town are Jews, so then you would have 2 raivs. But we hold like Reb Zeri, you don't need 2 raivs. Dam Reb Zeri, afal pisha dalsas medina nu'ulais. The doors of the city are locked, so you only have 1 majority. Because the case of the woman is only 1 majority. That's a case of the gates of the city are locked, because by the woman there's only 1 row. And even so, we go bas in majority. But the Gemara says, Rava says we see from here that Raiv Karev, we go bas a Raiv. But Rava said that this is not a good proof to Reb Chanina, because over here you have majority and frequency. V'Rava dekama Raiv Matzi, where it's a majority and frequency, lekelaman yamar. Says Rava retracted, and he holds this is a riot to Reb Chanina, because majority and frequency is really the same thing. Itmar Chavius Shetzafa Benar, a barrel of wine that's floating in the river. Amar Rav says Nimsas Keneged Er Sheruba Yisrael. If it's found alongside a city whose majority is Yidden, Mutter, that's kosher wine. Keneged Er Sheruba Nachrim, if it's found alongside a city that the majority are Goyim, Asira, it's Goyish wine, and it's Yayin Nesach. Shmuel Amar, while Shmuel says, even if it's found alongside Afilo Nimsas Keneged Er Sheruba Yisrael, even if it's found alongside a city that the majority are Yidden, Asira. Why? Because we look at the larger picture, and it could have flown from upstream, from many different places upstream of Goyim. Maybe it came from the large Goyish area of Haidikara, and therefore we don't go basa proximity, we go basa rive. So it says the Gemara, Lema bid Rab Chanina kamifligi. Let's say they argue with Rab Chanina. Demar Islay Rab Chanina. Shmuel holds like Rab Chanina that we don't go basa proximity, we go basa rive. And since the bigger picture is there's a lot of Goyish places, so it's no good. Omar Leslay Rab Chanina, and Rav says we go basa proximity. Says Merloi. The Kuli Alma Yisud Rab Chanina. Everybody holds of Rab Chanina that we would go according to the majority over the proximity. Except that it's the opinion of Rav that it's not likely it came from upstream. Because if it came from upstream, the barrel of wine would have been smashed along the way. If it came from Haidikara, Ikule Upashure have a matbala. If it came from upstream, then the Ikule and Pshure, Ikule is is the crookedness of the root, where it could have got caught in rocks, and Pshure is shallow water, where it would have been stuck. So that would have drowned it. Omar Savo Rav says, no, it's very likely it got caught in a quick current. Charifa denara nokivasi. The quick current brings it downstream, and it could have came from any goyish place, and we go basa the rive and not the karev. How chatzva de chamra? Now, chatzva de chamra is a barrel of wine. The ishtakach bepardesa de orla. It was found in a vineyard of Orla. Now, here, the question is, we're assuming that this was a barrel that was stolen. And it was found in a vineyard of Orla. Sharia Ravina. Ravina declared it permitted. So that why? Because instead of assuming it belongs to this vineyard, that is Orla, we say it came from the rive of the world, which is not Orla, and it's a Yiddish agagan. So it's, Lema mishum de savala de Rebbe Chanina. Says no. Shani Hasam, the mignav, if it was stolen, the mignav mina, since we assume it's stolen, if it was stolen from this vineyard that's Orla, the thief wouldn't hide it in the place that he stole it from. He wouldn't hide it in the place that he stole it from. But that's only if it's wine. That's only if it's wine, because if it's wine, he's not going to hide it there because the pressers are in the field. But if it's grapes, then he stole it before the harvest time. There's nobody in the field. Then mitznei. Then he would hide it even in the field, and then then we would perhaps say that it belongs to the place nearest by, unless there was a majority of places around that we could say it belongs to those places. Hano zike de chamra. Zike are skins. I think they call them flagons. If you read Robin Hood, right? Rich looks like he knows Little John. So I didn't say you look like Little John, but hano zike de chamra, flagons of wine. The ishtakan beikupoi. What happened is that they were found amongst the vines that belongs to a yid. Sharinu Rava. Rava permits them. And we don't say maybe it came from the majority outside that are not yidden. Says the Gemara, Lema loy savala de Reb Chanina. So let's say that he doesn't hold like Reb Chanina. Says no. The majority of the people that poured into flagons were all Yidden. Shani Hasem, the Ruba de Sheichchai Yisrael. The majority of those that pour wine are all Yidden. And therefore, since the majority of people that poured wine are all Yidden, therefore we could use it. V'hani mili baravrave, but that's only big flagons. Aval zutre, but if they're small flagons, that could be a canteen, which could be by any of the travelers, and the majority of the travelers were Goyim. They fell from the majority of travelers, and the majority of travelers were Goyim. But if there are big ones next to the small ones, then we say they're all permitted. And the big ones, we said the majority of the pourers were Jews into the big flagons. And the small ones were there when they transported the big flagons. They used to use the small ones as a counterweight, that it should be equal on the animal. They were used as a counterweight. Says the Mishnah Vayta. Getting along the way, we should welcome in Ilya Yusuf, Saul Feintuch, David Tessler, Richard Rosenzweig. Great to have everybody with us. And we do have still 30 Zoomers here on this double daf night, a Thursday night marathon. You have to distance a tree from the city 25 amas. You have to know that it's nice for the city to have open air space. And therefore it mars the city to have trees there. Carob and sycamore, which have huge branches, so then you have to distance them chamishim amma. Abishol says also kol ilan srak, any barren tree, a barren tree that doesn't have fruit, doesn't look nice. So that you have to distance from the city chamishim amma. Now the imo ir kodma, if the city was there first and then Berish planted the tree illegally, we cut it down. We don't compensate him. The im ilan kadam, but if Berish put the tree there before the city was founded, so then they still could cut it down because we're concerned about the majority. But v'naisin daman, they have to compensate Berish. Suffix zekadam is suffix zekadam. If we're not sure whether Berish planted it after the city or before the city. So since either way we cut it down, we cut it down, but we don't compensate him because he wants to take the money. He has to prove that he planted before the city was there. Why can't you have a tree next to the city? My timer. Because of the beauty of the city. Says the Gemara, now there is a halacha by a city of a Levi that it has 1,000 amas migrush, a park area of 1,000 amas, and then a green belt of plantations of 1,000 amas. So there is a machlokes whether this is only the cities of Levium, or if this is any cities in Yisrael. So according to the opinion that it's any cities in Yisrael, the Teifikle the Ein Oisin Sada Migrish, we don't make the fields into park area. V'loi Migrish Sada, we don't make park area into fields. Says Gemara, no, this is going according to Rabbi Eliezer, who holds that this is only in the cities of the Levium. Like Tzichle Rabbi Eliezer, the Eisen Sada Migrish or Migrish Sada. By a Jewish field, you could do. There is no such municipal rule. But within 25 amas, or 50 amas by Charber Shikma, Hacham Ishim Noya Ye'er Loyavdina. Says the Gemara, "L'Rabbanan nami di imrei ein oisin sada migrish v'loy migrish sada." Well, the only time you can plant in the park area, that's only to plant seeds. Trees are nice. Grain, you're not allowed to plant. Hani mili zram, to plant grain. Avalilona yisavdinan, to make an orchard you could do. But v'hacham mishum noyeh ha'ir, but to have a complete green belt around the circumference of the city, loy. Says the Gemara, where do we know that there's a difference between trees and grain? There's a halacha. The Tanya karpaf yoisim ebeisasayim, an enclosure more than 2 sa. Shehukaf ledira, that was surrounded for living purposes. So if it's surrounded for living purposes, then you're allowed to carry in it, because it's a rishus yachid. Nizra rubai, if you planted the majority of the closure with grain, that destroys its status of living purposes. Then harihu kigina, it's like a garden v'aser, and you're not allowed to plant carry there. Nita rubai, but if you planted the majority of trees, that doesn't take away. It's a very pleasant place to live for living purposes. It has the shade. It's an orchard. Harihu kichatzer, it's like a courtyard for living purposes. And what? So you see that there's a difference between trees and grain. Now, the ima ir kadma, if the city came before Beresh's tree, then kaites, Beresh has to cut down his tree. Ve'ena noisin dam. But if Beresh's tree is there first, so then they cut it down, but he gets compensated. Now, the din is by a bar that if, let's say, Rich has a pit, and Beresh plants a tree, and Beresh planted his tree after Rich's pit is there, so the din is Beresh has to cut down his tree, but Rich has to compensate him. So the Gemara says, "Ma'ishna gabi bar diktani kaitzeitz v'noising damim," that Beresh has to cut it down, even though Rich's pit was there first, but Rich has to compensate him. Or ma'ishna ha'acha diktani kaitzes, if the city was there first, then Beresh has to cut it down, v'eina noising damim, and he doesn't get compensation. Rav Kahana says, you know what? If the city is going to compensate Beresh, then nobody's going to do it. Kidra de Bei Shutfei, a pot that belongs to partners, is like Chamima, is never hot enough, or like Kriya, and is never cool enough. Because each one is going to say the other one is going to take care of it. So the Gemara says, I don't understand, what's the question? There's a big difference. If it's dealing with a public, then Beresh had the nerve to plant a tree and go against the public. There, he cuts it down and he doesn't get compensation. When he's dealing with just one individual, maybe he does get compensation. If he damages the whole city, then if the city was there first, he has to cut it down and he doesn't get that compensation. If he's only Rich, so it's 1 against 1, so we make him cut it down, but we make Rich compensate him. So the Gemara says, you're right. El itma Rav Kahana asefa itma. It says, im ha'ilan kadam, if Beresh planted the tree before the city was there. He did it before Fairway was built. So then Koitzeis, they still cut it down, but V'nois and Dam, they have to compensate. So the Gemara says, but why shouldn't they give him the money and then cut it down? The Beresh says, you want me to cut it down? Give me the money. The name Lahu, let Beresh tell them. Beresh is a practical guy. Hava liberation to make, give me the money first. V'ader akets. Says, you can't deal with the community that way. Because if Berish is going to say, give me the money first, nobody is going to come and, come forward with the money first, and it'll never happen. Amar Avkana Kidra the Bei Shutve, a part of partners like Hamima like Grira. Rather, Berish has to cut it down, and now once Berish cuts it down, now he's going to run after them. Suffix Zekadam is suffix Zekadam. If we're not sure who was there first, Kaitzates, he has to cut it down. Now, that's not the case. If we're not sure whether Berish was there first or Rich's bar was there first, so there we say he doesn't have to cut down the tree. So Maishna Mibar, the Amrit Lo Yakutz. There we say that if we're not sure if Rich's bar was there first or Berish's tree was there first, then we tell him he doesn't have to cut it down. So the Gemara says it's a simple difference. Hasam devadai, if we know that Berish's tree was there first, then he doesn't have to cut it down. So hasam devadai lav lameketskai. So here, where we're not sure, so Berish says, prove that you were there first, and then I'll cut it down. So, sveikanami lo amrina lo kites. Here, however, whichever one came first, whether Berish planted it first, or whether the city was there first, he has to cut it down. It's only a question of compensation. Hacha devadai lameketskai. Either way, he has to, regardless, he has to cut down the tree. So, sveikanami amrina lo kites. We tell him cut it down. Now Berish wants his money. You want your money? You want your money? Prove that your tree existed before the city. You bring a proof that your tree existed before the city, and then ushkal, and then you could take it. And only then you could take it. Now, why isn't this charging? It doesn't make sense. It's not charging because it fell out of the wall. That's a good reason. Says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, Marchikin es goyren kavua min ha'ir chamishim amma. You have to distance a permanent threshing floor from the city 50 amas. You have to know a threshing floor, they take a rake and they throw up the tfuah, and the wind comes and blows away the chaff. And the chaff could hurt somebody. So you have to distance it from the city 50 am. Lo yasa adam geirin kavua b'seich shelo. You can't make a permanent threshing floor in your property. Elim ken yesh lo 50 amma l'kol ruach. Unless you have 50 amas in every direction. O marchik miniti oisav shel chaveiroi. And you have to distance it from your friend's saplings. Umeniroi, and from his plowed area, bichdei shelo yazik, in order that the chaff shouldn't do damage. Now, the reason why the chaff would do damage is because what happens is it falls amongst the saplings and gets into the seeds and dries it up. The chaff dries it up. And the chaff does damage if it falls in the plowed areas, because it over-fertilizes, the chaff becomes fertilizer, and it over-fertilizes the area, which ruins the area. So now, the problem is that the Mishnah in the beginning says a distance of 50 amas, and then it says from other people's saplings or plowed area in order that it shouldn't damage, which implies that it's less than 50 amas. It's only in order that it shouldn't damage. So Maishno Reisha, Maishno Sefer. Why does the Reisha say 50 amas and the Sefer says just that it shouldn't damage? Amar Abayis, so Abayis says somebody is not muted. Please check who is not muted. Who is not muted? Ini mini mini mo. Eddie Chazan is not muted. Says the Gemara, I could probably mute him. Now he's muted. Now, says the Gemara, so Amar Abayis Seifa Asan L'Goyrin She'ena Kavua. The Seifa is talking about a non-permanent threshing floor, which doesn't have so much grain, so that they don't use a rake, so they don't throw it up in the air, so it doesn't travel so far. Heichi Dami Goyrin She'ena Kavua. What does it mean? A non-permanent threshing floor. Amar Rabbi Yosef Rab Chanina, Kol she'ena zayra bereches. He doesn't use a rake. He doesn't throw it up into the air. Rav Ashi says there's no machlokes. The end of the Mishnah is just saying why it has to be 50 amas away. Ma tam kamer, my time of marchikin garin kvuim in the air 50 amma. Why do you have to distance it 50 amas? Kidei shelo yazik, that it shouldn't do damage. It's not telling us a different share. Meisvei, this brisa parallels the Mishnah. Marchikin garin kvuim in a ir 50 amma, 50 amas. Ukeshem shemarchikim in a ir 50 amma. Kach marchikim midluav from one's gourds, umikshuav and from one's cucumbers, uminiti oisav and from one's saplings, uminirai shel chaverai and from the plowed area of your friend, 50 amma, 50 amas, kidei shelo yazik. So it shows that the Reisha and the Seifa are the same. That fits in very good, like Rav Ashi. Bishloim el Rav Ashi nicha. El Abaya, who says that the Seifa is talking about a different case, and it's not 50 amas, it's talking about Gorin She'ena Kavua, it's Kasha, it's Shver. Says Gemara Kasha, this is taka difficult. It's difficult on Abaya's pshat. So the Gemara says, Bishloim mimikshuav u'medeluav. You have to distance the threshing floor from cucumbers, from gourds. The azal afka, because the chaff goes, the asib belibe, and falls into the heart of the seeds, umatzvele, and dries it out. Elamanirai, but from the plowed area where there's no seeds yet, amai, what's the problem? You know why? Because it makes it it over fertilizes it and ruins the plowed area for further planting. It burns the ground. Rabbi say, what a wonderful evening to come and be with you this evening. Motzi Shabbos, Rabbi say, is at 10:40, 5 minutes earlier. We're getting 5 minutes earlier, so 10:40. Remember, Sunday is regular time at 5 to 9. Monday, no shear. So that's and Tuesday, wow. So, Sunday regular time 5 to 9. Monday, no shear. Tuesday, which is Shavasa B'Tamuz, shear is at 10:15 after the Tanis. Thank you for joining us, and have a wonderful evening.